evening and welcome to our Apologetics study. We are picking up right where we left off, right before Thanksgiving. If you remember, right before Thanksgiving, we asked the vital question, is Christianity the white man's religion? And we chronicled from the beginning of Christianity through Ethiopia down through the Congo that Christianity was not introduced at slavery. It was introduced in Ethiopia. Well, it was introduced in Jerusalem and it traveled to Ethiopia. I want to pick up tonight where we left off. We left off at this quote from Frederick Douglass, and this is what he said, if in case you forgot. He said, "What I have said respecting and against religion, I mean strictly to apply to the slave-holding religion of this land, with no possible reference to Christianity proper. For between Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference. So wide that to receive the one as good, pure, and holy is of necessity to reject the other as bad, corrupt, and wicked." And we kind of talked the last time, we talked about Frederick Douglass and how many perceived him to be atheist until he actually writes this in his slave narrative. He begins to talk about how he became a free man in the United States in a time where black men were not free. And for many, their apprehension, and the reason we're talking about this tonight is that for many, their apprehension toward Christianity is because they say that it was a way that we were brainwashed. And if it was a tool to brainwash my ancestors, I don't want any parts of it. And I heard a young guy say to a couple of us who we were sitting at dinner and we happened to be in a conversation, and he said, "I'm having a hard time divorcing the whiteness and the evils of America from my blackness, and it seems like Christianity keeps coming up." And so tonight I kind of want to dig into that, kind of continuing where we were last week, because I'm willing to bet that if you're having a conversation with somebody about your faith and they look like you and they happen to be male, one of the arguments they're going to say to you is, "It's a white man's religion. And why would I be subjugated to the same thing that held us in slave chains for 400 years? It's why Hebrew Israelism is attractive. It's why the Nation of Islam is attractive. It's why Kemetic Egyptology is attractive. But here's the truth. There is no better freedom, no greater freedom than in the gospel. And so tonight, we're going to try to uncover that a little bit. I think one of the first places we have to begin is we're going to begin in our Bible. And I want to begin in our Bible, and I want to start at a verse I'm sure all of you have heard in John. And the verse is real simple, real simple. Jesus is talking, as he's speaking, he makes this definitive. Most of us in this age like to think of subjectivity as opposed to objectivity, and I didn't give them those words, but I'll break it down for you like this. If something is an objective truth, like humans need oxygen to breathe, it means that I can apply it everywhere. A subjective truth would be like me saying to you that I hate candy. Don't like candy, don't want to smell it, don't want to be around it. It is a subjective truth. Miss Vernita here may love candy. I don't know, do you like candy? Okay, Miss Vernita may love candy, right? And for her, she can say it's delicious. That's a subjective truth because for her, it's delicious. For me, it's disgusting. But we both need oxygen, okay? Society will have you to believe that belief in Christ is a subjective truth. But we've got to begin at the fact that Christ is an objective truth. The fact that we are sinful people in a sinful fallen world is a truth that is applicable to everybody, okay? So if you'll go ahead and put that scripture up from John, it's probably one of the last verses I gave you. Jesus says, he says, "I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." I want you to notice that he uses the definitive article, "the." He doesn't say, "I am a way." He doesn't say, "I am a truth." He doesn't say, "I am a life." And you can come through the Father, but you can also come through others. He says, "I am the way." He says, I am the truth. I am the life. And that kind of builds his case, because when he says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, that means that anything that stands in opposition to me is a lie. Now, that doesn't fit into our narrative of society right now, because our society wears bumper stickers that says coexist. Our society would teach us that I'm supposed to tolerate everybody. And I think love is an estrogen, and we don't have to divorce ourselves of that. But I can't bend on the truth, because if it's an objective truth, and he is the way, he is the truth, and he is the life, and no one can come to the Father but by me, that's the truth. Well, in history of this country, and in the history of Africa on the western coast, and in the history of Europe, they tried to marry some subjective truths to this objective truth, okay? And that's why people can't see Jesus for the gospel. I want you to see this. On the western coast, when various colonizers came down to the western coast of Africa to bring the gospel, they told them, you got to wear Christian clothes. Does anybody know what Christian clothes look like? I don't know what Christian clothes look like. But they told them, you got to dress like we dress in Europe, and really what it was, you got to wear European clothes or you can't be saved. Now, if Jesus is the way, and Jesus is the truth, and Jesus is the life, and I know Jesus wore robes and sandals, how does a European clothing equal my salvation? They also said, you've got to speak our Greek, our Hebrew, and our Latin, or you can't be saved. And so you got these countries in Africa where they're changing the way that they dress, they're changing the way that they speak. Even if you go to Africa now, there are some churches now where they got the music and they're wearing the African garb, but you go in their church, they wear the black robes and the white wigs. It doesn't match. It doesn't fit. But what happened is there was these missionaries who came and said, well, you can't be a Christian unless you wear Christian clothes. Now, I want you to see this written into the common law of England, which at this point ruled most of the world, where these words, now you would see, it says white woman or white man. But at the time it said a Christian. So a Christian couldn't own another Christian, and a Christian couldn't go here, and a Christian couldn't do these things. And up until 1690, those words said Christian. In 1690, there were black slaves in America who were Christians. And those Christians went to court and said, hey, you said you couldn't own another Christian. I'm a baptized Christian. I've confessed and I've believed. You've got to free me. In the same year, you see the laws begin to shift in the Americas and in Europe. And the words, everywhere you saw Christian, now says white man. Okay? And so I want you to see this. They were trying to marry this subjective, I don't want to call it truth, but we're going to use that word, that subjective truth with the objective truth that's how I come to the Father. But if Jesus lived in Jerusalem and moved through Judea and died on a hill called Golgotha and was buried and rose and never wore a wig, didn't even consider himself a Christian, it was a name given to us later, how do we apply the cultural norms of the day to the way that we believe? And so you've got a whole lot of people who were brought over in chains and in stocks for capital gain, and when they became Americans and they brought their Christianity with them, all of a sudden they were told that now you're not good enough to be Christian, we'll now turn it into white supremacy. Now what's weird is before this time, they had this thing called Christian supremacy. Y'all ever heard of the Crusades? You know, Crusades, these wars where they went and conquered people in the name of Jesus. I mean, and I want you to see this. These things didn't match the rhetoric of Jesus in our Bible. Jesus was a God of peace. He was promoting He stands up in the temple. He says, I have been anointed to preach the gospel to the poor. They're subduing the poor, taking advantage of the poor, doing everything, not providing good news for the poor, but really bad news for the poor. And they're putting Jesus' name on something that doesn't look like Jesus. And so I want us to see this because there was this whole subjective truth idea. And I want us to look at our sheet. We've got two terms here. One is called legalism. And if you listen to anybody talk about Christianity these days, I'm sure you've heard that word. And all legalism means, I guess I'll put it to you like this. In the book of Islam, legalism is celebrated. I follow the rules to a T. My job, they believe that they're going to following the rules. The Jews believe they follow the rules to the T, and they will earn a spot in heaven from following the rules. The beauty of the gospel, and this is why this is a bad word in Christianity, is that I know I'm not able to follow the rules to a T. And since I know I'm not able to follow the rules to the T, I'm not legalistic, I'm faith-filled. Now, that doesn't mean that I go live any kind of way. It doesn't mean I don't do things that Jesus said do. But it's this realization that if I had to follow the legal code of Christ, I'm going to fail. If I had to follow Leviticus to the law, I'm going to fail. Every time. I can't even go shopping. I can't eat what I want. I can't go where I want. I can't do what I want. And even if I tried, I'm subjected to make a mistake because it's even about my thought life. That's legalism. What we're talking about tonight is called cultural legalism. Cultural legalism. Now, cultural legalism is the excessive creation and the subsequent adherence to law or formula that requires one to adhere to a cultural norm to be counted as moral. So, essentially, what we see happening in 1600s, 1700s, and in the 1800s is in order to be counted as a Christian, you basically had to become white. And so all these black people in excess are saying they want to be Christians, and they're barring them from coming to church. And they're barring them from reading the Bible in full. They won't even let them get baptized next to them, and they won't let them even they can't get baptized, they can't come to the Lord's table. They got all these problems, right? And so you see something happen. The black church is born. And I want you to see this. For those of we've got a couple Bible students who are watching. You probably won't learn this in seminary. And you probably won't learn this in seminary because seminaries are usually the result of the systems that this supports. But basically what happened is the black church is born. The black church is not born because black people want to be separate. The black church is born because black people wanted to worship God kind of like the Israelites. Now, if we go to Exodus chapter 8, verse 1, we see this statement. God is talking to Moses. And when he's talking to Moses, he says to him, he says, you go tell Pharaoh. And you go and you tell him to let my people go so that they may serve me. Other versions say, let my people go so that they may worship me in the wilderness. And I want you to see this. There's like this really cool parallel because he says to them, he says, I want you to let them go so that they can worship. Let them go so that they can have a full experience with me. If I let the slaves in America go so that they may worship God in freedom, they might know the freedom of walking in the Spirit. If I let them go so that they may worship God in the fullness of his power, they may know what Pharaoh came to find out is that God is the God of the oppressed. If I let them worship me in the fullness of my power, if they go worship God in the fullness of his power, they may find themselves so enamored, so in love with this liberative, loving God that we may not be able to subdue them. And what's interesting is when you start reading slave narratives, even though the master didn't want them to find this God, they had already found him. They had already fallen in love with him. And so the black church was born. And for some, it was born in brush harbors. That's in the middle of the forest. And they would go back there and have church services. And they would read the Bibles, and some of them had memorized their Bibles in their original languages, and they would declare, hey, they said that there's no Exodus, but I remember hearing about a Moses and how he brought the children out. They went in and they had preachers, and they had all these things. Now, I want you to see this. The black church had preachers that they had appointed. When the slave master went and organized for them to have church, because it had to be separate, he would appoint a black preacher and tell them, don't preach about the Exodus or about Philemon, and don't go in there and tell them about coming out or coming in Joshua. Take all of that out of there, because we got to maintain control. Now, what I want us to notice here is in today's question, I want to raise this question, and maybe y'all will talk to me, maybe you won't. I realize I don't really have talkative people in the room. But I want us to think about this. When we integrate, and this is a hot topic, when we integrate into white churches, often we don't get to bring anything with us. So it's like the same thing. It's like we were cast out 400 years ago. You can't come over here. And we feel guilty now. Y'all can come over here, but leave your stuff behind. But the black church was never, there was never a time when the black church said white people couldn't come. They never really wanted to come, because to them, our stuff is better. It's shinier. We like the way we worship. We like it. And so I guess I want to ask the question. I want you to ponder on this. Is it the same? Having a black church, having a white church, one is exclusive, one is inclusive, but those others don't want to be included. Is it the same? But what I don't agree with is, why do I always have to leave my home to come to yours? Any thoughts? No thoughts? Okay, well, we'll keep going. Okay. Now, because here's the thing. We live in a society where we interact with people who are purple, green, orange, yellow, blue, all the time, every day. You know, we go here. There's not a day that I don't touch somebody who doesn't look like me. If it's the God of the Bible, why a black church? Why a white church? That's why. That's where it happened. That's where it started. But I want you to also see this. To the black kid who is still studying their theology, and they said, well, there was a slave Bible, and, well, they kept us subdued with the gospel, and the gospel was, we never got the real gospel, and I'm sure it's been changed. There's over 65 iterations of it, and you know, the list goes on. I want you to notice this. We mentioned it 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to mention it again. That line from the Ethiopian Coptic church was never broken. They're still in existence, and they go as far back as Acts 8. But even further, when you look at the history of the black church, the history of the black church was always redeeming what was taken away, okay? And so when we were not allowed to read certain books, the HBCUs, black seminaries, all started in the black church. Why? Because we had nowhere else to go. Now, as we keep moving, I want us to think about Christianity at large. And I guess I'll ask the question, and if y'all don't respond, I'll just keep talking. When you think of Christianity in America, what comes to mind? I think of mission trips. I think of dark sanctuaries, fog lights, but I really think of mission trips. I remember I grew up in school, and it's no secret I went to school with a lot of white people. All my white friends went on mission trips in the summertime, and I won't tell the truth. I ain't never been on a mission trip, But all of them, that's what they would do. They would go spend a week, they would go to Nicaragua, they would go to Africa, they would go somewhere. They all went to mission, they would go on mission trips. And in the fabric of it, there was this idea, there was like this heroism. That if I'm gonna become a Christian in this nation, that I've got to go save somebody from something, or else I'm not a good Christian. And I think that that's dangerous. Because whose God? Whose job is it to do the saving? Now, I'm not saying don't care for your neighbor. I think you should definitely give to the blanket drive. And I think you definitely should go feed the homeless and do those things. But I think that they're in the fabric of our country, even down to the way that we teach history, there's this idea of heroism. I remember being in school and being taught in like the second grade that America has never lost a war. Well, that's not entirely true. But in the fabric of interwoven into who we are, there is this idea that America always saves. And so if America always saves, and we're a nation under God, who's the Savior? And so I'm not pushing against, but I just want us to ask the question. I want us to think. I want us to be pushed, because if the question is, how can I serve a Savior who oppressed me? I just want to ask the question. I want you to think about it, especially if you're at home. Is the Christianity that you're interrogating a real Christianity? And I'm not talking about every person. I think there are a lot of good people who go to churches all over this country. I think there's a lot of good meaning people. But I think for a black person trying to ask the question, where do I find value and can I find it in the gospel? I think you've got to ask the question, which gospel am I interrogating? Yes. Yes.
You started talking about the mission. It's like it's a greater ability with those who still seem oppressed, as opposed to those who seem, in our churches these days, are very lucrative, and people are on the same line as we are. And we're doing the same, we're driving the same, we're living the same, we've got the same jobs. I think it's an inability to worship with those who you feel are much like you, because that is not the intent, and maybe I'm going the wrong place. No, but I can worship with those who are oppressed, who needs me, heroism, like you spoke of. It's just a comment, and it all does seem to be, it all comes together, because like you said, there is not a desire, I think, to worship with us. And sometimes I think some of it goes back to also the negativity, negative statement, be it jokingly or serious, about our services from ourselves, from our own people. The services are too long, this and that. And people tend to pick up on those things from us. And those things are they dwell in our minds and in their minds and in their spirits, rather than coming. If we're serving the same God, it doesn't mind how long the service is. Right. It doesn't mind, what the music is. We're serving the same God. Precisely. So I think it's a lot about oppression. I really do think that.
I think you're on to something. Okay.
So I was just gonna add, I want to kind of piggyback off what she said. I also think, in addition to, she was being a little nice about it, I'll say it. I get that. But it's like, it's about the money. They feel that they have more money, or they think that they have more money than we do. And we kind of believe that they have more money than we do, but we don't realize that we actually got more money than a lot of people. We just don't use it the way we're supposed to. And I think, in addition to, I think where it really kind of starts is, me personally, is politics. If it wasn't so political, everybody want to be separated all over this place, and and who you like and where you like and all of this stuff, everybody could come together and worship together because we can live together. We can't live together. We obviously ain't gonna be able to worship together.
I think you both are absolutely spot on. I think something we've kind of got to keep in mind is that the gospel has in it at its core the ability to unite. And if we are worshiping the Jesus we say we're worshiping, it has the ability to unite. But so many of us, I think we get caught up in our, our preferences. And I'm gonna just tell y'all the truth, right? Because I say this a lot. I'm in white spaces a lot. But when it comes to church, this is the kind of church I like, right? I have a preference. But that's something I'm having to get over. I'm having to grow through. As much as I don't really want to grow through it, I'm having to grow through it, because if the gospel has the ability to unite, that it does it matter what the worship music sounds like if it's worship to the right God, And so I guess where I'm kind of trying to move the conversation is we've got to get out of the idea that worship is about us and our opinions, right? Because if I live in Mountain Brook and I think that in Mountain Brook I got to go over here and it's got to be quiet and we got to, be in 45, if it's to the same God, what is the difference? But I want to also push this. So if there's this heroic idea that's been woven through the thread of our country, and it is not just religion, it is in everything we do. It is in how we deal with politics. It's how we deal with other countries. It is how we are diplomatic. We have this idea that we have to save. I want you to also notice that in the black church, there's this different thread that goes through the church. Not saying that it's better, not saying that it's worse, but there's this thread where the black church has always had to inform you of who you were because no one else was, okay? And so while maybe not as much now because we're not as close to our roots as we used to be, but in the 60s or in the 50s, when a black man was only a man at home and at church, the church informed who they were. We didn't use big words like the imago Dei, but you were made in the image and the likeness of Christ, and they made sure that you knew that when you were sitting on the pew. And so it informs who you are, what you're attached to, but also I want you to also notice this other thread that suffering caused. Now, you remember we did the Exodus study. I told you that the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle had to be in the middle of everything. When they traveled, it was always in the middle. When they set up camp, it was always in the center of the camp. It was always in the middle because God wanted to be the center. In suffering, the church, especially the black church, was in the middle of everything. It was the only institution we had. And so because we were in suffering and we didn't have anything, it was all we had. When we stopped suffering and we got some other institutions, it stopped being the center. And I want you to just see this thread right here, that it almost then propels us to want to go from having God at the center to then we kind of fall in love with this heroism. I'm going to go save somebody else. I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to make me then feel good. And when really, and I'm not saying go suffer, because I don't want to suffer. I ain't trying to fall apart. I don't want my life to fall apart. But there is something unique about the experience of suffering that puts God at the center. And I don't think anybody in this room wants to suffer. But there was this unique thread that happened that when suffering happened, we attached God to everything. Black folks started businesses, it was a Christian-based businesses. Black folks started music. You had Sam Cooke over here influencing R&B, but also serving at his church every Sunday. You know, there was this core center, and I dare I submit, you can argue with me because I wasn't there. I've only read about it, so it may not be true. It seemed like the community was more united then. Now, any questions, any comments, any ideas? So, hip-hop comes on the scene in the 80s. Hip-hop comes on the scene in the 80s, and it's born, and a lot of the major players start referencing notions to Islam, all kind of stuff. And so they're no, I don't know a lot, I don't listen to a lot of rap, so I can't list them, but from what I've read, they start making a whole bunch of notions to Islam. You got this one group who starts promoting Egyptian Cometicism, and we'll talk about that one week. But it turns out there were more Christian rappers than they just weren't mainstream. And what's kind of interesting to me is that as they come on the scene, they begin to rap and create music that is conscious, and not conscious like God is grass,